In the western confines of Britain, there is a certain royal island of large extent, surrounded by water and abounding in all the beauties of nature and necessaries of life. In it, the first neophytes of Catholic law found a church constructed by no human hand, but by the hands of Christ himself.
Hello, I'm E. Raymond Capt, biblical archaeologist and historian. That extraordinary statement was written by St. Augustine in a letter to Pope Gregory, who had sent him on a mission to Christianize the Anglo-Saxon people of southeast England. What could possibly have been the origin of this astonishing statement? The tradition is that Joseph of Arimathea brought the boy Jesus to England and that he built the first Christian church in the west at Glastonbury in Somerset. Few people appear to be aware that the first tiny flickerings of the Christian faith arrived in the Britannic Islands more than 500 years before St. Augustine ever arrived.
The Christian religion began in Britain within 50 years of Christ's ascension.
Other historians attest to this fact. William of Malmesbury, a 12th century historian, noted for his accuracy in his writings, stated,
"In the year of our Lord 63, 12 holy missionaries with Joseph of Arimathea, who had buried the Lord at their head, came over to Britain, preaching the incarnation of Jesus Christ."
In the 2nd century, Tertullian, after St. Augustine, the greatest of the early church writers, wrote,
"The extremities of Spain, the various parts of Gaul, and the regions of Britain which have never been penetrated by Roman legions have received the religion of Christ."
The historian Gildas continues with these words,
"These Britannic islands, stiff with cold and frost, received the beams of light, that is, the holy precepts of Christ, in the latter part, or in the last years of the reign of Tiberius Caesar."
As Tiberius died in AD 37, it is quite obvious that the Christian faith reached Britain only about 4 years after Christ's ascension, and many centuries before St. Augustine's mission. Another authority, Polydore Virgil, the learned Italian historian, wrote in the 12th century,
"Britain, partly through Joseph of Arimathea, was of all kingdoms the first that received the Gospels."
Sir Henry Spelman, in his book Concilia, wrote,
"It is certain that Britain received the faith in the first age from the sowers of the word. Of all the churches whose origins I have investigated in Britain, the Church of Glastonbury is the most ancient. The cross, the symbol of our faith, the gift of Queen Elizabeth II, marks a Christian sanctuary so ancient that only legend can record its origin."
This view, promoted by so many of the ancient church writers, was officially recognized by 4 great church councils, those of Siena, Bâle, Pisa, and Constance, in the 15th century, which held that
the churches of France and Spain must yield in point of antiquity and precedence to that of Britain, as the latter church was founded by Joseph of Arimathea immediately after the Passion of Christ.
So contrary to what might have been expected, the Christian faith, instead of gradually expanding outwards from the Holy Land, where it originated, took a great leap westwards as far as the Britannic Isles only a very short time after Jesus Christ returned from whence he came. Why? What was so special about Britain? What sort of country was it? What sort of people were these Celts? The Roman writer Diodorus gives us a clue.
"The aspect of the Celt is terrifying. They are very tall in stature, with rippling muscles under clear white skin. Their hair is blonde and thick and shaggy, like a horse's mane. They wear brightly colored and embroidered shirts with striped and checkered cloaks, fastened at the shoulders with a golden brooch."
Another Roman writer, Dio Cassius, describes Celtic Queen Boadicea.
"In stature, Boadicea was tall and was gifted with a powerful voice. A great mass of the tawniest hair fell to her hips, and she wore a golden necklet and a multicolored robe. Over it, a thick cloak held together by a brooch, and she carried a long spear.
Dio Cassius continues, when she rode into battle against the Romans, she wore a great twisted golden torque or ornament, and her two daughters who rode with their mother in her war chariot might well have worn bracelets of pure gold on their wrists. Such elegant Celtic gold work can be seen in the British Museum in London.
The stature of the Celts, and their beauty, and their prowess in war may easily be discerned that they had a lively sense of justice and honesty. They were proud and arrogant and were easily provoked, but they were very artistic and loved music. When dancing, the girls held hands with the men. They preferred large quantities of beer rather than wine, but they would drink anything alcoholic.
The Celtic communities lived in large circular or rectangular huts, straw thatching being replaced annually. Smoke from the cooking hearth filtered through the straw, killing insects. It appears that the Celts made a great impression on Roman writers. One wrote,
in times of danger, the Celts relied to a great extent on their women folk. A whole host of enemy warriors could not withstand a single Celt if he had his wife to aid him. As a rule, she is tall, blonde, and blue-eyed, and when provoked, quite terrifying. If she were to strike out and kick, it would be as if a catapult had shot out 4 missiles at one time.
Yet, despite their ferocity in war, the Celts were exceptionally artistic people. Sir Arthur Evans, eminent ethnologist of the 19th century, describes them as this elegant and exotic race of people, elevating them from the old myth of blue-painted savages to dignified and skillful people who could design such artifacts as this, the Battersea Shield found in the River Thames in London. Another elegant shield was found in the River Witham, decorated with the outline of a boar, common in England in those days. That a people who could design and make such objects as this, the Desbora Mira, could ever have been described as painted savages is inconceivable. These, then, were the boastful, boisterous, and beautiful people, so admired by Roman historians, and upon whom the light of Christ was about to shine. The Celts, who had overrun most of Europe, had crossed over into the British Isles, displacing the original Proto-Celts, themselves being displaced by later arrivals, the Angles and Saxons, yet another branch of the same family, all of them migrating westwards. This is the Scotland the tourists know and love, a place of highland, lakes, islands, and beautiful scenery. Although Scotland's Highland cattle have a somewhat fierce appearance, with their shaggy coats and long horns, they are gentle and well-mannered. Back in the 5th century AD, the north of Scotland was populated by a strange and relatively unknown painted people, the Picts, whose strange carvings on stone are still not fully understood today. The Picts are believed to be descendants, in part, from the Jutes of Denmark. The Picts were an intelligent, pastoral people of Viking origin, to whom the message of the Gospels as taught by St. Ninian and his monks, and later by St. Columba, made a strong appeal. In Neagle Museum in central Scotland are many ancient Celtic crosses, and upon the earlier non-Christian animal outlines, drawn with a remarkable simplicity of line, the sign of the Christian faith came dominant. One might well quote from the book of Isaiah that they were a people who walked in darkness, not the long, cold darkness of the winter months, but a darkness of the soul, until the meaning of the Gospels brought to them a new light. Such a light was to illuminate the soul of a Romano-British slave herding pigs on the slopes of Slimish Mountain in Northern Ireland. He had been abducted from his South Wales home by Irish raiders and had been sold to an Irish pig farmer. The slave's name was Patrick. Many years later, after an adventurous life, Patrick was to spread the gospel of Christ far and wide, even to the pagan high kings of Tara in Ireland, a message which was to blossom later in the Isles of Iona and Linden's Farm, or Holy Island. One has but to read through Patrick's writings, his letters and confessions, to see that there is no hint of any Roman Catholic dogma. Indeed, they much resemble any of the four writers of the Gospels. The torch of Christ was taken up by brilliant, aggressive, and somewhat forceful member of an Irish royal family. His name was Columb, later Latinized to Columba. He might have become an Irish king, but to the relief of the Irish, he chose life as a Christian missionary. In the far west of County Donegal is the little village of Glencolumcille, named after Columba, and in and around the houses the ancient ones set up marker stones, predating Christianity by 1,000 years or more. Later, the Christian cross was superimposed on the pagan symbols, proof enough that the gospel had arrived in the far west. Columba evidently had enough respect for the age-old Irish traditions to leave the stones as they were. Even he dare not displace them. Columba was born near this lake, Gartan Lake, in Donegal, and the Irish Tourist Board have established a small museum on the lakeside. It contains a life-size model of Columba, deep in thought, illuminating a manuscript, a craft at which he excelled. And a stained glass window shows his later crossing over to Iona with his 12 companions. A ruined stone chapel near Lake Gartan is described as Columba's oratory, but its construction suggests a much later period than the 6th century. In the days before printing, the only copies of the scriptures were handwritten and hand-illustrated, a skill at which the Celtic monks excelled. This is a page from the Book of Kells. However, such artistry was to be the cause of Columba being expelled from Ireland. It is reported that on one occasion, Columba went to visit his old tutor, St. Finian, and was evidently so taken with a copy of a Latin prayer book that he asked if he might borrow it. Permission willingly given, Columba made a copy of it without asking St. Finian's permission. It seems that the copyright rule existed even in those far-off days. St. Finian, after many requests to Columba to return the book without any success, as a last resort appealed to King Diarmid, a relative of Columba, to get the book back. But even this attempt failed. And this comparatively simple incident touched off an inter-clan war in which as many as 3,000 men were killed. A rapidly convened council was called, and it was decided to banish Columba from Ireland until, as declared by the council, Columba had won from the heathen as many souls for Christ as would replace the number killed in the battle. So in 563 AD, Columba and some of his personal friends built a seagoing curragh, an Irish wood and hide covered boat, and setting out from Londonderry on the River Foyle and following the north coast of County Antrim, heading for the Scottish Islands. The North Channel between Northern Ireland and Scotland is not the smoothest of seas, and no doubt many a fervent prayer for safe arrival was offered up. Eventually, whether by accident or design, or just poor navigation, Columba and his weather-beaten crew arrived at this small beach at the southern end of the little island of High, now known as Iona. Soon after Columba arrived on Iona, and after many prayers of thanks were said for a successful landfall, Columba moved his party over the hill and down the other side to settle on a site for a monastery. A suitable site was found near a freshwater stream toward the middle of this jewel of an island. Some 1,500 years later, to commemorate Columba's crossing, 12 hardy members of the Church of Ireland recreated his epic voyage by building a replica of Columba's boat, and together with a television film crew, sailed and rowed across the North Channel, a particularly vicious stretch of water, making their way past Islay, then Colonsay, south of Mull, and so to the fine white sands of Iona, there to be greeted by a large crowd of tourists and the Archbishop of Canterbury and several film crews. Today, a small ferry shuttles visitors to and from the island of Mull across to Iona Harbor. The island is about 3 miles from north to south and 1.5 miles across, and is composed of archaic igneous rock, the most ancient visible rock on the surface of the earth. Although treeless, set among the heather, there are wonderful varieties of wildflowers, flourishing among the rocks and crags and moorlands, delicately scenting the air. The blue Hebridean seas which surround Iona are island-studded to a far horizon. 1.5 miles to the east is the large island of Mull, sometimes called the Ross of Mull. Once it carried a considerable population, many of whom gave up their struggle with the unproductive land and immigrated to the United States. Now its hills and valleys are the home of the red deer. To the northwest are the rocky Tresnish Islands, one of which is Staffa, with its gray cathedral caves, which inspired Mendelssohn to compose his Fingal's Cave music. Further to the west is the long, low island of Tiree, once cultivated by the Columban monks, and once, during misty weather in wartime, had torpedoes fired at it, as it was thought to be an aircraft carrier. They failed to sink it. Northwest of Iona, beyond tiny Calf Island, the vast Atlantic stretches for 2,000 miles, as far as the shores of Labrador. Nowhere else can be seen sand more dazzling white than the beaches of Iona, or a sea so green and translucent that one feels that one could reach down and touch the seafloor, when in fact it may be many feet deep. It is said that a favorite walk of St. Columba during his last years on Iona was to a tiny hill on the northern end of the island that offered the tranquility and peace that Columba sought. This is St. Martin's cross, which dates from the 9th century, and it has carved upon it representations of the Virgin and Child Jesus, Daniel in the lion's den, and David playing the harp before King Saul of Israel. Little remains of St. Matthew's cross, one of the earliest crosses on Iona. It has carved upon it a representation of the temptation of Adam and Eve. It was the Bible, not personages, which was the epicenter of Celtic Christian life. While they followed Catholic usages, they avowed no supremacy of the Pope. This small mound to the west of the abbey is Tor Ab, where Columba had his original cell or hut. On the summit is a slot in the stone where a cross once stood. This was erected shortly after Columba's death to mark the site of his cell. What appears to be a fireplace was in fact his seat, a board extended across the two supports. Only fragments of the original abbey, founded by Reginald MacDonald in the 13th century, remain. The present abbey having been reconstructed under the leadership of Dr. George MacLeod, commencing in 1939. This tiny chapel is called St. Columba's Shrine and is believed to be the site of his original tomb. Nearby is the well that supplied drinking water for the abbey, although the monks probably preferred a type of mead. The restoration of the cloisters was made possible by many generous donations from Canada and the United States, who take more than a passing interest in the ancient history of the old country. In the sanctuary is the communion table, a beautiful gray-green Iona marble, the original communion table having been despoiled at the Reformation. The effigy of Abbot McKinnon, who died in 1509, can be seen to one side of the communal table. On the other side is the sedilia, where important visiting clergymen would have been seated during the services. In a small side chapel is the tomb and effigies of the 8th Duke of Argyll and his wife, who gave the abbey back to the Church of Scotland. This is the door of the sacristy that contains the sacred vessels and vestments. The stonework of the arch dates from 1500. A picture of Columba in stained glass overlooks the nave of the abbey. To the west of the abbey is the 12th century Street of the Dead, along which the departed saints and foreign royalty were carried for burial in the graveyard. Martyrs Bay is so named after a particularly vicious massacre by the Vikings in 806 AD. The nunnery of Iona was founded by Reginald, son of the Gaelic king of the Isles, and a Norwegian princess. His sister was the first prioress, and his descendants, the MacDonalds, lords of the Isles, were patrons of the abbey and the nunnery. In 1567, Mary, Queen of Scots, granted the nunnery to the last prioress, Mary of Marietta, the Clean. And the last few old nuns gradually died out, and the nunnery was abandoned. In 1899, the Duke of Argyll gifted the ruins of the nunnery to the Church of Scotland. However, back to the 6th century, Columbus soon had the entire island organized and started to instruct the somewhat dazed inhabitants on the best ways of fishing, farming, and the making of clothing, all of which one assumes they had been doing quite successfully for generations past. Columba stayed on Iona for about 2 years, then set out on his many missionary journeys, some of which required considerable physical courage, often among unfriendly and suspicious communities of Picts, both pagan and hostile. At the northeastern end of Scotland's Great Glen is the town of Inverness, through which runs the Inverness River. On this hill overlooking the town, King Bruda of the Picts built his fortified palace. Not fortified strong enough, however, to keep Columba out, and he soon had Bruda made a Christian. After many years of traveling among the Picts, many of whom accepted the Christian faith from Columba's preaching, he returned to Iona, and when as an old man he knew that his time was come, he asked that he could be carried to the high altar of the abbey, so that he could have his head rest upon the sacred stone of Bethel, on which had rested the head of the patriarch Jacob Israel, a stone which had arrived in Ireland from Palestine many centuries before. Some believe this stone to be the one and the same with the coronation stone in Westminster Abbey in London. Before he died, Columba made this prophecy: "Unto this place, small and mean though it be, great homage shall yet be paid, not only by the kings and peoples of the Scots, but by rulers and foreigners of barbarous nations and their subjects. In great veneration too shall it be held by holy men of other churches." The old stone church built by St. Columba has given way to the reconstructed abbey of the Iona community, strangely in accordance with Columba's prophetic words: "In Iona of my heart, Iona of my love, instead of monks' voices there shall be the lowing of cattle, but ere the world comes to an end, Iona shall be as it was." In such reverence was this little island held that 48 Scottish, 4 Irish, 6 French, and 7 kings of Norway gave instructions that they were to be interred beneath the short, springy turf of Iona. Many of the grave covers have carved upon them the arms of these royal personages. To save them from the weather, and there is much weather in this part of Scotland, the grave covers have been put on show in the Abbey Museum. In that same year, the year that Columba died, there came a Roman emissary from Pope Gregory, Augustine, to bring Romanized Christianity to Britain. A monument has been erected near Ramsgate in the county of Kent to mark the arrival of this eminent priest. It wasn't long before cracks began to appear between the two opposing branches of the church, the Celtic or Chaldee Church and the Roman. Columba's monks celebrated a different date for Easter to that of the Roman Church, and this, together with an unimportant issue as to which way a monk's hair should be trimmed, proved to be a major stumbling block. Not long after the arrival of Augustine's mission, due to the incompatible differences between him and the British Church, a meeting was arranged at a place beside the River Severn in Gloucestershire, in the west of England, where, according to the historian Geoffrey Monmouth, Augustine lacked even the simple courtesy of rising to greet his fellow Christians. So great was his dislike of the Celtic Church. Standing before St. Augustine in a defiant group, the British bishop's spokesman said,
"We know no other master than Christ. We know nothing of the Bishop of Rome in this new role of Pope. We like not his strange customs, and we will not observe them. We are the British Church, the Archbishop of which is accountable to God and to God alone, having no other superior on earth. Be it known and declared that we all, individually and collectively, are in all humility prepared to defer to the Church of God and to the Bishop of Rome, and to every sincere and godly Christian, so far as to love everyone according to his degree in perfect charity, and to assist them all by word and deed in becoming the children of God. But as for any other obedience, we know of none that he who you term the Pope or Bishop of Bishops can demand. The deference we have mentioned we are ready to pay to him as to any other Christian. But in all other respects, our obedience is due to the jurisdiction of the Bishop of Carleon, who is alone under God, our ruler, to keep us right in the way of salvation.
In its lifetime, the Celtic Church played a considerable part in preserving and developing Christian culture in the Western world, at a time when the continent of Europe was little more than a confusion of self-interested nations.
The clergy of the Continental Papal Church were almost wholly employed in the metaphysical and chronological disputes current at the time, along with discussions on martyrologies, all of which was a sad contrast to the pure spiritual dissemination of the gospel by the ancient British Church, the Chaldees. St. Ninian, St. Columba, St. Aidan, and many others had introduced into northern Britain the knowledge of the Gospels, and for centuries after the domination of Rome continued to hold services. Corruption of the Christian faith, if it occurred, was ruthlessly stamped out by the firmness of the senior clergy. The Celtic Chaldee Church had great missionary zeal, and large numbers of them went out to Christianize much of Europe, from Iceland to southeast of the Danube. Now, this is a fact of history which has been diligently suppressed by Rome. These early Celtic Christian monks were called Chaldees. Their faith, a simple, pure faith, free from the corrupt practices and doctrines of the Church of Rome. They had no worship or veneration of the saints or angels, no prayers for the dead, no confessions to priests, and no elevation of Mary, the mother of Jesus. They hoped for salvation through the mercy of God alone, through faith in Jesus Christ.
The purity and simplicity of this Christian doctrine, as professed and taught by the Chaldees, appears to have been in full harmony with their character and way of life, rugged, rigorous, as it certainly must have been then. When doctrine and church ceremonial began to increase on the continent of Europe, Rome found in the Chaldees their most determined opponents. According to the Venerable Bede, a cleric of Jarrow, these Chaldees only practiced such works of charity and piety as they could learn from their study of the prophetic and apostolic writings of the Bible. This strict adherence to the written word of Scripture and their utter disdain of all other authority was soon to bring the Chaldee and Celtic monks into head-on collision with the Church of Rome. The Chaldees strongly condemned the corruptions and superstitions which had been contaminating Christianity for centuries. They continued to teach the simple gospel of Christ, until in later years, monks arose who were inferior to them in learning, but superior to them in wealth and ceremony. The complexity, color, and beauty of the Roman Catholic services easily captivated the eye of the simple country folk, dazzled as they were by the glitter and gold of the ceremonies and the unfamiliar language. Rome, by force, cunning, and seduction of every kind by degrees, corrupted the teachings of the Christian faith from its original purity. The Celtic monks were so aware of the splendor of life that they grudgingly every moment wasted in sleep. Their hands were strong yet very gentle with bird, beast, or child, and they were skillful almost beyond belief with a fine quill pen. No Celtic monk ever traveled without a stout walking stick or staff, and from his shoulders hung his leather satchel, containing his precious books. St. Columba is usually thought of as the first to spread the Christian message to the far north, due perhaps to his forceful personality, but much of the ground had been prepared for him by St. Ninian. It was St. Ninian who built a little stone church here on the southern coast of Dumfries and Galloway at Whithorn. There is a stained glass window in the parish church at Ruthwell of St. Ninian, who the Venerable Bede described as a most holy and revered man of the British race. Ninian was the son of a British chieftain and was educated on the continent. He stayed for some time with St. Martin of Tours, who later sent him his own stonemasons to help Ninian build his church, which used light-colored stone in its construction. This gave the name to the place White House, or in the Latin, Candida Casa. Later, this name evolved into Whithorn. The later monastery, parts of which still remain, became incorporated into St. Ninian's Priory, built on the site of the original Celtic Church, which became a famous seat of learning, known throughout the Celtic world. Monks from Whithorn took the Christian message to the remotest parts of the north. Archaeological excavations are shedding light on Whithorn's Christian origin. The original Christian community was found northwest of Whithorn's main street. In the town museum, there is a comprehensive display of very early Christian crosses. These have marked the way of those early saints who brought the faith to the North and Western Highlands and Islands of Scotland. For those pilgrims hardy enough to brave the crossing of the Irish Sea, there were one or two suitable landing places in sheltered coves near the spot where a small chapel had been built, in which the pilgrims could offer up prayers of thankfulness for a safe landfall. A drawing on a notice board shows pilgrims coming ashore. The little chapel was built in the 13th century, replacing an earlier one on the same site, which existed in St. Ninian's day. There are many standing stones in this area, but this one, called Peter's Stone, suggests an intriguing mystery. Engraved on it are the words, "The place of Peter the Apostle." Could it be that St. Peter was buried here, far from the sunny skies of Italy? Or was this another Peter? There is no proof whatsoever that Peter was interred beneath the Vatican in Rome. This is a 5th century Christian marker stone in Galloway, and embodies on it the two Greek letters Chi and Rho, the first two letters in the Greek word for Christ. The stone also bears the name of 3 Christian priests. Here lies the holy and chief priests of Ides, Bivinius, and Mavorius. This is the little parish church at Ruthwell in Dumfries and Galloway. Inside is the most elegant of all the early Celtic crosses in Scotland, the Ruthwell Cross, a unique example of artistic creation. At the foot of the cross, Mary of Magdala is anointing the feet of Christ. The simplicity of line equaling any classical statuary, hardly the work of a so-called primitives that earlier history books suggested inhabited these islands. Coastlands such as these in southern Scotland suffered frequent raids by the Norsemen, the Vikings, and churches and monasteries were ransacked, their precious libraries of handmade books burned. Yet strangely enough, for so violent a people, many Vikings later settled in the British Isles and adopted the Christian faith. Despite Viking raids, which could strike with great speed far upriver, due to the design of their shallow draught longboats, Celtic missionaries carried the gospel as far as the Orkneys and the Shetlands, both in Viking territory. One can judge the fear the monks had for these swift attacks from a short poem penned by one of the Lindisfarne clerics.
The bitter wind is high tonight, it lifts the white locks of the sea. In such wild storm, no fright of savage Viking troubles me.
Of all the influences which created Celtic society, none made greater impact than the Christian faith. The image of the gentle hermit, disdaining all possessions and living a life devoted to God in a humble cell, is one of the most powerful in the history of the Church. These early saints obtained a spiritual level which many later mystics sought, but few reached. Their humility and integrity shows through the somewhat fanciful and imaginative accounts written by later historians. Indeed, so much fiction was added to the lives of the saints that one Cornish clergy was credited with crossing the Bristol Channel on the tail of his own shirt. In 625 A.D., King Oswy decided to Christianize his people, so he sent to Iona, where he had been educated by the monks, for help.
There arrived St. Aidan, who decided to build a monastery on Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne, or Holy Island, is cut off at high waters by the tide from the North Sea, a remote enough situation to suit the minds of the Celtic monks, desirous of solitude. So successful was this Christian institution that it succeeded in converting Mercia, Essex, and later as far south as Sussex. Whitby is a town and harbor on the east coast of Yorkshire. It was a thriving fishing port until the Brussels-run economic community limited English fishermen to only 2 days a week at sea. Whitby is also the birthplace of Captain James Cook, the discoverer of the Australian continent. On the headland to the south of the town is the gaunt remains of Whitby Abbey, where in 662 A.D. a meeting was called to decide once and for all whether the people should follow the Roman or the Celtic Church. The differences between the two branches of the church were causing such a rift that the whole structure of the Christian church was endangered. So King Oswy called this historic meeting, the Synod of Whitby, for a final decision. He himself favored the Celtic Church in which he had been educated. Unfortunately for the Celtic representatives, the Roman party included a young priest named Wilfrid, to whom nothing mattered but the advancement of the Roman Church. He was also very persuasive and never lacked for a telling phrase. He would have made an excellent lawyer. The Abbess Hilda, with British bishops Coleman and Kidd, led the Celtic party. And although they put up a very thoughtful argument, were easily outclassed by Wilfrid's sarcasm, who stated that the Picts and Britons, foolishly in these two small islands, are opposing all the rest of the universe. The main purpose of the synod was, in fact, an excellent one: to agree on the most accurate date for Easter, that all might follow the one path. Wilfrid, however, put forward a seemingly unanswerable statement, and that it was St. Peter, so closely allied with Rome, who held the keys of the kingdom. And after all, just what did the Celtic Church have? Just a few local saints. The unhappy King Oswy, in the face of Wilfrid's crushing arguments, decided to find in favor of the Roman Church, and the Celtic party retired gloomily through the heather back to their islands. So, although the flickering light of Celtic Christianity was dimmed for a little time in the north, the Christian church in Ireland, founded by St. Patrick, existed for many centuries, free and unshackled by Roman jurisdiction. For about 700 years, the church in Ireland maintained its independence. But King Henry II decided to bring the Irish Celtic Church into the Roman sphere of influence. How little he could have been aware of the gathering clouds of bitter dissension this decision was to cause, and how little he would have been aware of the everlasting death and destruction that was to occur so far ahead of his own time. Accordingly, King Henry called for a special council of Irish clergy to meet here at Cashel in southern Ireland in 1172, a most infamous date in Christian church history. The combined influence of the king, along with the intrigues of the Roman clergy, backed by the power of the papacy, put a decisive end to the ancient and established church in Ireland, all of which resulted in the endless and bitter controversy between the Roman Catholic and the Protestant churches in Northern Ireland today. From St. Patrick's Day and up to the Council of Cashel, Christianity in Ireland was a period of brightness and simplicity in the teachings of the Scriptures. But from the Council of Cashel to our own day, there has been a time of trouble indeed. However, the light which appeared to be well nigh extinguished in the north and west was only smoldering, awaiting a new fresh breeze to awaken it to its former glory. For it was upon the eve of All Saints' Day in the year 1517 that suddenly the light burst into life again as Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses onto the door of the church at Wittenberg, Germany. During the Dark Ages, a time of spiritual apostasy, the medieval Roman Catholic Church had become deeply involved in a bid for political power in Europe, which, together with its rapidly increasing wealth and its policy of selling indulgences so that people could buy their way into God's kingdom, all this contributed toward bankrupting it as a spiritual force for good. Martin Luther's surgery cut deep into the roots of this apostasy, this perversion of the Christian doctrine of redemption and grace. For Luther attacked the sale of indulgences and the veneration of the remains of the saints, naming them perversions of the truth. This is the beautiful jeweled casket of St. Martha of Bethany in Tarascon in South France, an example of Roman Church exquisite artifacts, diverting people's thoughts and prayers away from God. Luther insisted that the Roman Catholic theme of the merits of the saints had no foundation in the Gospels, and that justification is by faith and by faith alone. The Reformation in Europe expanded rapidly, but made little progress in Italy or Spain. In England, King Henry VIII repudiated papal authority, and in 1534 established the Anglican Church, which included the newly written prayer book, the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, with its beautiful Elizabethan language, the language of Shakespeare. Queen Elizabeth I made no secret of her adherence to her father's desire for a reformed Protestant England, and was in grim mood in Parliament when she said to the assembled company of clergymen,
"This much I must say, that some faults and negligencies are growing within the church, whose overruler God hath made me, all of which, if you, my lords of the clergy, do not speedily amend, I mean to depose you. Look you therefore well to your charges."
In today's atmosphere of liberal thinking, there are new creeds and false beliefs, not only springing up, but rapidly gathering thousands of adherents and converts who have been unimpressed by the official church's watered-down gospel. The Bible, God's only divinely inspired book, is not only ignored, but worse, is rewritten in parts to suit the trends of modern-day thought. Even high-ranking clergy, including bishops of the established church, pour doubt upon the statements of the Holy Scripture and question even the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. Purity of life, modesty, the sanctity of marriage, and human life in the womb, all these were sacred in the Victorian era, but today this is regarded by so-called advanced thinkers and many clergy with a tolerant smile as being old-fashioned and out of date. Perhaps Queen Elizabeth's grim warning might well apply to these lukewarm shepherds of Israel.
The seeds of precious truth planted and nourished by St. Columba and the monks of the early Celtic Church brought forth a faith which in the end overcame ecclesiastical opposition, and like a flickering candle flame burst forth into a blazing light of the Reformation. 100 years later, the light moved again, this time away from the ancient country which had borne and nourished it to a new land far away to the westward. There it was planted in the wilderness by the pilgrims who sought freedom from the constraining bands of church authority. Their first act was to sign a compact, the Mayflower Compact, which declared, among other things, the advancement of the Christian faith for the glory of God. They feared to inaugurate their new colony without a recognition of God's sovereignty and the need to obey Him. This Mayflower Compact is America's first great constitutional document. The Pilgrims saw themselves as called into their promised land in order to establish a new Israel, which would be a light to the whole world. They believed God had a definite plan for them in this new world and prayed for divine protection and guidance. They recognized the Word of God as the supreme law of the land, and they based all their own new laws on the Bible. America was not formed a nation apart from God, but a nation under God. Little did the Pilgrim Fathers know that the light that they planted, in accordance with the words of prophetic Scripture, was to illuminate the birth of the old country's new daughter nation, which was destined to grow into a great and powerful people, the United States of America.